Hey everyone, it's Konrad Bobilak here, author of Australian Property Finance Made Simple and Director of Investors Prime Real Estate. I've made this short video for you today talking about the federal budget and its likely impact on property investors in 2017. You know, I've been talking about real estate investing and educating people for the last 15 years. I'm also an author, and one of the things that I've always been saying to people, and this is for the last really 5 years especially, is there's been nothing really new in real estate investing or finance for the last 10 years. In fact, I open a lot of my seminars with the lines, these are the four most dangerous words for property investors. This time it's different. However, having said that, this time it is a little bit different. From a macro level perspective, nothing will change. And I think that the Liberal government isn't going to have a massive impact on the property market. However, there are substantial changes that have come into effect that are very important for investors to understand, as well as first home buyers and retirees and foreign investors. And that's why I've made this video outlining the number one is what's changed, what's been introduced in the budget, and its likely impact on property investors. Before I do that, why should you listen to me? A couple of things about myself is I've got a lot of things behind in terms of my background. I'm a real estate agent, a mortgage broker. I've also got a diploma in financial planning. Most importantly, I'm a property investor. I've built a multi-million-dollar property portfolio right here in Melbourne, and I'm a real estate agent. I'm on the ground all day talking to investors, sourcing properties for investors. So I've got a real practical know-how, finger on the pulse, so to speak, in the market. So I know exactly what's happening right now. And I think there's going to be different things happening in the next few months that are very interesting as a result of this budget. Also, I'm an author of Australian Property Finance Made Simple, which you can buy online or any good bookshop around Australia. At the very end of this, I'm going to give you a special bonus as well, access to my online home study worth $497. So watch the video to the very end, and at the end I'll give you a link that you can just click on and you get instant access to this bonus valued at $497. So in terms of what's happening, there's been a number of changes. And let's start off with first home buyers, because this is the group that's been really vocal in the last 5 years saying we've been priced out of the property market, we can't get in. Well, the reality is the property prices in Melbourne have always been expensive, and first home buyers have always been priced out of the first home buyers market in Melbourne. You know, Melbourne's never been affordable, okay? But let's talk about the budget and how it affects them. There's good news for first home buyers looking to save up a deposit for the first home. The new 2017 budget states they'll be able to use their superannuation towards buying a home from 1st of July 2017. What this means is that savers will be able to salary sacrifice up to a maximum of $30,000 or $15,000 per year from their pre-tax income over the compulsory superannuation contribution. You can then withdraw this cash amount plus any earnings a year later from the 1st of July 2018 and use towards a house deposit. So there's a bit of good news there. I mean, to me, it's not going to have a massive impact on the amount of volume of first home buyers for two reasons. Number one, deposit's not the issue, it's the borrowing capacity. And really, the government has done nothing to address borrowing capacity of first home buyers. If anything, they've made it harder for first home buyers to get into the market because interest rates are so low. APRA has put pressure on the banks to change the algorithm and credit scoring, making it harder for investors and property owners to get into the market. So I think the deposit scenario is not an issue. You know, yes, for some will make a difference that have high incomes. The reality is the median price in Melbourne at the moment is $800,000 for detached houses. Most people on average incomes of 80 grand are completely priced out. And let's face it, most first home buyers don't want to be living in fringe suburbs. They want to be living in trendy suburbs. So if you look at the top trendy suburbs in Melbourne, Collingwood, Carlton, Brunswick, St Kilda, Elwood, forget about those areas. Without $1.5 million, you're not even in the market. So putting savings into your superannuation, these funds are to be taxed at 15%, while the withdrawals will be taxed at 30% below the marginal tax rate. This is to help accelerate the savings by at least 30%, not a big deal, compared to using normal savings accounts. This measure is likely to boost demand in the housing market whilst put upward pressure on the property prices. If anything, all this is going to do is put pressure on prices around the $600 mark, which is the opposite effect of what the government wanted to actually have. So this is going to backfire on the government. The reality is there's nothing the Liberal government or Labor government can do to address property prices in Melbourne and Sydney, and I'll talk about why at the very end. Number two is stamp duty measures for first home buyers. This is quite substantial, I must admit. This is going to help some of them get into the market, but once again, there's not going to be a substantial volume of first home buyers entering the market anyway because of serviceability issues. The Victorian government has announced that stamp duty will be abolished for first home buyers purchasing a home with a dutiable value of no more than $600,000. This will make the existing first home buyers 50% duty reduction that applies to the purchase of a home with a dutiable value of no more than $600,000 and for a full exemption. So basically this is for any properties between 600 to 750. But the reality is now interest rates are so low, around 4%. What the banks have done is they've increased the benchmark rate for assessing buyers to buy their own home. So to buy a 750 home, even though you can afford the repayments, interest only at 4% or principal and interest, internal serviceability criteria has become so much harder to get these loans. Most of these home buyers are excluded now from that market. So they're stuck with properties below the 600 mark on an average income of, let's say, if they're on an average income of $78,000, which means you're pretty much looking at new house and land estates. And because of that, what's happened with this new generation of employees is they've deferred buying the property and they're buying investment properties. They're renting and buying investment properties, in most cases apartments. So even though this is really cool on paper and it looks like something substantial, I think it's going to have a very limited effect on the market, mainly because the issue has never been stamp duty and deposit. The issue has been serviceability, the ability to borrow money from a bank, okay? Very simple. And they've done nothing to address that. In fact, they've done the opposite. They've made it harder now to get loans. Also, there's been some changes, minor changes to the first home buyers grant. The Victorian government has announced that it intends to increase the first home owners grant, I should say, from $10,000 to $20,000 for new homes built in regional and up to valued up to $750. The government wants to desperately channel young people away from the major capital cities because of the pressures that we have already on infrastructure and transport into regional areas like Ballarat, Bendigo, etc. The reality is most people don't want to go there. Most networks that these people have are in Melbourne, for example, or Sydney. Their family, friends, where they grew up, and most people won't go to regional areas. Even though I think regional areas are excellent, I think it's harder for a young couple just to leave their whole life in Melbourne and live in Ballarat. Even though Ballarat's a really cool place to be in, I mean, how many people can realistically do that? It's a big step. This will apply for contracts signed from the 1st of July 2017 to 30th of June 2020. Eligible first home buyers of new homes in metropolitan Melbourne will continue to get the 10 grand first home owners grant, which is still pretty cool. It still doesn't solve the issue. And the issue is not getting in with a deposit or stamp duty. The issue has always been serviceability. The average serviceability is very low at the moment. For the average income earner of let's say 80 grand, you're looking at 450, 500,000, which means they're pretty much excluded from the entire market in Melbourne. Property investors have really been punished in this budget, or seemingly have been punished. And mainly the punishment comes from the perspective of people who have no properties behind them. I haven't been affected at all as an investor because I don't care about stamp duty or depreciation. I'll just use more equity and I'll just increase my rents on my properties to compensate for any losses that I'll make or any deductions I'm missing out on. But let's cover this as well, and let's cover what implications it has for property investors. Under the new rules, which come into effect from 1st of July 2017, depreciation deductions for plant and equipment items, such as ovens, sinks and curtains, etc., will only be allowed if the investor actually bought them. So if they're not part of, they can't be part of the contract that you're entering into. So you can only depreciate fixtures and fittings if you've put them into your property after you settled the property, which is kind of crazy, because the banks won't lend you money against the property that hasn't got a kitchen. So basically, they've just left these depreciation schedules that you get from the 1st of July on properties that you have purchased as an investor, you'll no longer be able to claim depreciation on ovens, sinks and curtains and cabinetry and carpets and all that kind of stuff. In the past, investors were able to claim deductions for all plant and equipment items if the property at the time of acquiring the asset, according to each item's effective lifespan. So obviously different things have different lifespans, like for example, kitchen cabinetry might have a lifespan of 10 years, carpets might have a lifespan of 6 years. So in the past, I was able to depreciate those over the lifespan of the item. Now that's all gone. The changes will apply to any items purchased after budget night, Tuesday, May the 9th, but existing investments will be grandfathered, exempt from the change, which is fine. Really, there's no effect on me or investors that have already built their property portfolios. On the contrary, investors will be encouraged to support affordable housing schemes through variation of capital gain tax. If you want to lose money, okay, definitely invest in any kind of affordable housing. Guys, stay away from ANRAS, okay, and all that stuff that the government has done. The capital gain on those properties is virtually non-existent, okay? Most agents don't want to deal with those projects, so never invest in any kind of affordability rental scheme the government actually introduces. The capital gain tax discount on qualified affordable housing will increase from 50 to 60%. The capital gain tax discount is applied for assets held for more than 12 months before the relevant capital gain tax event. Whoopie-doo. So I'm buying a crap property that no one wants, that doesn't grow, and the government says if you buy this really bad property that no one wants, we're going to increase your exemption on tax from 50 to 60% by 10%. So I'm buying an asset that doesn't appreciate in value, but the government is going to give me a discount on the amount of capital gain tax I can claim. There's not going to be any capital gain tax to claim because the thing doesn't appreciate in value. This is another thing that's just designed by academics who've never invested. You know, they've done fellowships of some university and sitting there behind some desk saying, how else can we influence the market? Property investors have also, another restriction on negative gearing. And by the way, negative gearing was pretty much left intact. And no one is going to really stuff around with negative gearing to a large extent because ultimately the basis for capitalism, okay, the basis of any business ownership is this simple. If you have a lemonade stand, you have your expenses. You have your lemons, okay? You got your water and your ice cubes, okay, and your sugar. And then when you buy those items to make income, you're able to get a tax deduction against those items, right? That's like the capitalism 101. That's what negative gearing is, okay? If you're buying a property, you have expenses associated with holding the property. You have cash deductions and non-cash deductions. You can't change those, okay? If you do try to change those, you're going to be rewriting the entire tax act in Australia, which no one really wants to tackle. So what they're going to do is tinker with certain elements of it, hoping they'll get it right. So negative gearing restrictions have been introduced in relation to travel expenses. As of 1st of July 2017, investors will no longer be able to claim tax deductions for travel expenses relating to inspecting, maintaining and collecting rent from a residential property. So all those people that have bought Gold Coast properties, they'll no longer be able to claim their 3-day tax deductions every year to go there and claim and inspect the property. Really, it's not going to have any impact. The only impact it's going to have is on tourism, because if you look at the Gold Coast, where a lot of people have been conned into buying properties, high density apartments I'm referring to, by the way, not townhouses or houses, that's actually quite good. They won't be able to claim the deductions, which means there's going to be less travel interstate, which means it's going to affect tourism, if anything, and local economies. So once again, this is really going to impact anything. The Victorian investors will lose their off-the-plan stamp duty concessions. This is a major thing, by the way. This point here is huge, okay? And I think this will really change things in terms of how investors assess investment properties. I don't think it's going to affect any kind of release any more volume onto the market, but I think this is, out of all the things they've done in this budget, this is the most substantial by far. The Victorian government has announced that off-the-plan concessions are being stopped and will only apply to buyers who occupy the property as a primary place of residence. So if you're an investor buying an off-the-plan apartment, townhouse or house after the 1st of July 2017, whether it's off the plan or completed, your stamp duty is the same. You're no longer getting a discount on the stamp duty. Now that's a huge thing. Just so you understand, a $500,000 property off the plan in Victoria, off the plan, Stamp duty is 5 grand. Completed, 25,000. Difference is 20 grand. $1 million property, completed, okay, you're looking at 55,000 stamp duty. Off the plane, 10 grand. That's like 45 grand difference. So that's a huge thing. So stamp duty is going to be definitely influencing part of the market, especially people that are buying the second and third investment property. All that's going to do is defer people buying properties because they're going to have to save money for stamp duty. That's all it means, okay? It's not going to really affect the supply, although in the short term, it's going to defer some investors buying the next property. So definitely off the plane, apartments will become less attractive because of the stamp duty concessions no longer being applicable. You know, that's going to have some impact on things, definitely. So it's a way of kind of, you know, making property less attractive for property investors. I mean, I hate paying stamp duty. It's such a waste of money. And I think when the formulas were originally set in place to calculate stamp duty by the state revenue office, they never knew the properties were going to go up to $2 million and you're going to have to pay, you know, 130 grand in stamp duty. But once again, this is one aspect of the budget that is quite substantial. I must admit, I was very surprised that they actually got this through. And obviously the Liberals got this through because Labor wanted to get this through for a long time. If you look at this budget, by the way, it's more like a Labor government budget than a Liberal government budget. And the reality is this government is quite useless. It can't do anything because of the, you know, they're pretty much locked in by Labor. So anything they introduce to the market has to be approved by Labor, which is unfortunate. Foreign investors got smashed in this budget. I mean, this is the end of foreign investing in Australia, which I think is fantastic, okay? I've always been coming from a perspective of that foreign investors are destroying the market here to some extent. And I'm not talking about foreign investors buying our best properties. I'm talking about stock being built by certain developers that have no local market appeal, purely developed for the overseas Asian investor. And I'm talking about high density apartments being built in Melbourne and Sydney, which no one really wants, apart from people living in Singapore and China. So I think the fact that this has happened is a great thing, personally. And I'm not talking about as an investor, as a real estate agent, I'm talking about as a citizen living in Melbourne. I don't want to see these crappy high density towers being built in Docklands and South Bank and the city anymore. You know, I think that, you know, we should have quality housing being built that has local market appeal as well as foreign investor relevance. So foreign investors in Australia will no longer be able to claim primary place resident exemption for capital gain tax purposes. So whatever they make, they pay full tax on. If a property is purchased and left empty or failed to rent out for at least 6 months of the year, foreign investors will be taxed a ghost tax equal to the foreign investment application fee, which is around $5,000. A lot of you guys probably don't know this, but Lorimer Street, especially around Docklands and South Bank, there are towers that were completely sold in Asia, especially in China, where most of these apartments have never been opened up or leased out after they've been completed. Because a lot of Chinese investors don't want buyers or renters living in their properties because it's going to affect the energy of the property and it's going to have wear and tear. And people say, well, that's crazy, why wouldn't you want the rental? Well, if you're worth $100 million in China and you're just trying to get $3 million out of the country and park it in Australia to get your capital gain of 5, 6, 7%, you don't really care about the rental, you know, and that's why they don't rent them out. In fact, there's entire buildings in Docklands and South Bank that are virtually empty. They've been sold overseas to wealthy upper middle class people, and those people have settled those properties and have no intention of ever renting them out. They just want to get some money out of the country. Now, those people will be taxed $5,000, which is nothing to them anyway, so it's not going to really affect any of them. And I don't think that's going to increase them to lease out the property. I think we'll just pay the 5 grand. You know, if you're worth $100 million in China, you don't really care about 5 grand here, okay? It's like threatening me with a $10 fine. I'll just pay the fine, I don't care, you know. Foreign investors will be able will also be limited to 50% of purchases in new developments other than townhouses to give Australian buyers opportunity. So obviously this is referring to high density apartments. However, this may actually result in reducing property supply as some developers will no longer find it viable just to sell 50% to the local market. Well, they're going to have to adapt or they're going to become dinosaurs, okay? The reality is these local developers have been building crap for far too long that's designed for the foreign market, and the game is up. And interestingly enough, by the 1st of July 2017, there's 15,000 apartments in Melbourne that are about to settle, and 80% of them won't be able to get loans because the 4 major banks have pulled foreign lending altogether. So you've got these 15,000 apartments, high density towers, that have virtually no local appeal at all, that I reckon 80% of investors in China will walk away from. Not only has the Chinese government been really clamping on money leaving the country, Australian banks don't want to be lending money to that sector either. So you're going to see a lot of bargains on the market. I think it's a great opportunity, by the way, for first home buyers to get into a really cheap property in the city and buy something at a fire sale price. So if you really have to know the market though. I mean, it's a dangerous thing for people from interstate, but if you're in Melbourne and you're a first home buyer, you know, you might pick up one or two bedders in Docklands or South Bank at a fraction of their price because they're going to be absolutely fire sold, because really there's no local demand for them. No one in Australia wants to live in the city. This is the thing, we do not want to live in the city, not yet. We want to live just outside the city in trendy suburbs, like Brunswick, like St Kilda, like Williamstown, like those areas. North Melbourne, East Melbourne, West Melbourne, you know, Carlton, Collingwood, those areas. We don't want to live inside the central business district. That's something that's relatively new. However, having said that, for the first home buyers that are priced out of the market who can't get the detached house with a big backyard, that could be the best option for them to get into the market. But you've got to buy the right property in the right place for the right price. You know, you've got to really do your homework, because ultimately a lot of these towers have been built for the foreign market and they have no resale potential. So you've got to be really careful. However, I think there's going to be opportunities there for first home buyers as well. You know, I think over the next 10 years, you're going to see thousands of apartments being fire sold in Melbourne because they were originally developed, you know, to satisfy the foreign market. And now the foreign market has been restricted to a large extent by the government. Also, we have downsizers and over 65s who will be able to contribute up to $300,000 to the super from the sale of the principal home, if they've owned the home for at least 10 years. This will be treated as non-concessional contribution outside their existing concessional and non-concessional contribution caps. The limit is per person. So a couple can contribute up to $600,000 and take advantage of this measure for the same home. This measure applies even if they've reached the $1.6 million cap in the private pension. Any amount over $1.6 million will be placed in an accumulation account where earnings are taxed at 15%. The requirement for this home is that you have to own the home for at least 10 years, and the proceeds being included in the means test for the age pension will make the scheme unattractive for all the people. However, and a better policy will be to reduce the stamp duty by 50% for those selling all the family homes, as this would free up more housing stock, and the state and government would still get the 50% stamp duty on the transaction that would otherwise not happen. This is what's happened with, which I find is so hilarious that this actually happened. 10 years ago and 15 years ago, there's a lot of studies that were showing that in Melbourne and Sydney, there's going to be a glut of unwanted 4 and 5 bedroom houses located in the middle ring suburbs of Melbourne and Sydney. Because theoretically, and obviously this was designed, these theories, by the way, were created by academics, not by real investors. They speculated that you have these baby boomers that have bought these houses in the 50s and 60s, and the kids have gone now. They've got this massive 4-bedroom house on a 1,000 square metre block in 3 to 5, 7 k's from the city, and now they're older, they're wanting to travel more. The kids have gone, they've got this massive big house, and they're going to be dumping them all and downsizing to a townhouse in the area, and there's going to be this massive glut of these properties. Well, guess what? They didn't end up selling anything. In fact, they're holding on to those properties, which I find ironic, and no one can get them out. So you got these couples in these big houses that are paid off, and they're not downsizing. They're just holding them. If anything, they sell the backyard off to a developer and keep the main residence, which is fantastic, by the way. And this theory that was designed 15 years ago has backfired completely onto these theorists They come up with these theories every 10 years. And I'm going to do the same thing. I've got a 30-acre block, 1,300 square metre block in Melbourne with a big 5-bedroom house with a pool, and I've got a bar and a gym and a double garage. I'm never selling my house. I'm going to be there till freaking 95. The only way I'm leaving that house is they're going to carry me out in a pine box. Okay, and I don't care what the conditions of housing are in Melbourne. People can be screaming unaffordability left, right and centre. I worked my ass off to get my house. We came here as migrants with zero. I came to Australia with my parents when I was 9. My parents came here with a suitcase. We've worked hard to get where we are, and nothing the government can do can persuade me to downsize my property, especially when I'm in my 60s or 70s. They can go and get stuffed. And that's how a lot of people think. And that's why they've created this scheme to get these old people out of these properties, because they're saying, oh, well, young people can't get into the market. Well, the reality is, you know, people want to get into the market, they've got to get creative. They've got to start earning money. That's the reality. It's like saying, oh, I want a Bentley. Great, buy one. It's 650 grand. Well, can you afford 650 grand? No. How much can you afford? 50 grand. Where can you get a brand new Commodore? But I really want the Bentley. I know, everyone wants the Bentley. The Bentley's 600,000. But can't it be 50 grand? No, it cannot be 50 grand. Why? Because it costs $1 billion to make the design in the first place, and they've got to get their money back. Oh, but that's not fair. Well, you know what? Life's not fair. Wear a helmet. Life sucks. Get used to it. That's the reality. Melbourne's expensive. Yes, it's the most livable city in the world, 6 years straight. Why can't it be cheap? Because it's grown at 12% per year for the last 10 years. Well, can't we get a cheap house? No. Why not? Because it's expensive. Oh, that's not fair. Tough. It's the reality. You know, this is the reality of the market. Melbourne is expensive because it is the most livable city in the world. Can you imagine if Melbourne was the most livable city in the world but be very cheap? Can you imagine a scenario where people say, Konrad, I'm looking for a brand new townhouse on 2,000 square metres of land in Hawthorn, overlooking the Yarra. Have you got anything? Yes, I've got 5 of them. No one wants them, and they're $400,000 each. I mean, that's insanity, isn't it? It has to be expensive. How can something be cheap and be high growth at the same time? It doesn't make any sense. It's an oxymoron, you know? So I'm sick of hearing from people about, oh, it's too expensive, it's unaffordable. It's always been unaffordable. It's been unaffordable 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. It's never been cheap to get into the Melbourne property market. In fact, if anything, it's easier to get in today with all the incentives than it was 20 years ago, because 20 years ago, the banking system was much more restrictive. It was much harder to get lending than now. The environment is much more competitive today than it was 20 and 30 years ago. People are throwing money at people today. 30 years ago, if you want to get a loan, you put on your best suit and you go to the bank manager and plead with them to get you a loan. You know, those days are gone. Anyway, that's my rant. And the bottom line is, what impact will the budget have for the Australian property market in the medium to short term? My opinion is it's going to do the exact opposite of what it was designed to do, except for the foreigners. Foreigners got smashed without question. They're pretty much out of the market, and they're going to be driven away from buying apartments, which is cool. I never liked those apartments being built in Melbourne anyway. I thought they were completely out of place. If you look at the local market though, has the budget addressed the #1 problem in Melbourne for first home buyers, which is affordability? No, it hasn't. It has miserably failed to address that. You can't address affordability because it's not an investment market, it's an owner-occupied market. People are emotionally attached to their homes they live in, and they're not going to sell them unless they want to upgrade. That's the reality. There is no legislation the government can create that can break the nexus, that link between ownership and pride in Australia. We've been conditioned in this country to almost identify and link our identity with the suburb that we live in, which is craziness when you think about it. My background originally is I'm from Poland, and in Poland, my town that I was born in, Wrocław, is about 1,000 years old. All right? It was set up about 900 AD. And every town in Poland, because they're so old, has rich and poor people living in the same area. You know, you have one street separating the rich and the poor. In Melbourne, what we have is clusters of suburbs that were originally designed by developers to be released and sold at a particular price point. So we have demographically fragmented suburbs in Melbourne and Sydney. And that's why people kind of tend to associate people in terms of which suburb they live in. People actually now, once they ask you what suburb that you live in, once you identify the suburb and they know what the median price in the suburb is and roughly what the, I guess, the feel of the suburb is, they'll try to classify you as a human being, which is insanity if you think about it from a detached perspective. But that's what's actually happened in the market, and there's nothing the government can really do. Number one, all it's going to do is this. Investors that were sitting on the fence thinking about buying off the plan properties are going to go in hard between now, in May, and 1st of July, and they're going to sign contracts to get the stamp duty discount. So it's going to create a mini boom for investors who are otherwise not going to do anything. After the 1st of July, first home buyers are going to go in hard for the first few months and put pressure on price points on any property between 600 and 750 because they're getting all these bonuses and perks, especially with stamp duty concessions. Now, you would think, why would a house go from 600 to 625? I'll tell you why, it's very simple. If you're pre-approved for 600,000 as a first home buyer, you've already would have saved the 25 grand for stamp duty. Now, because you got a stamp duty concession, you're not going to buy a house for 600 anymore, you're going to buy a house for 625. So all they've done is they've increased the prices of properties short term, and you're going to see a major jump in the market between after the 1st of July for first home buyers. Retirees are going to do nothing. Some will scale down. They're going to scale down anyway. Most of them won't move out of their homes, and I don't blame them. And yeah, foreigners will be driven away from our market, and I think developers are going to have to realise they can't create products just for the foreign market. They're going to create products for the local market that are also appealing to the foreign market. So all they're going to do is restructure the types of dwellings they're building, which means you won't be able to build shoeboxes that are 35 square metres in Melbourne or Sydney anymore. You're going to be building proper one-bedroom apartments that are 55 square metres to 65 square metres, and two-bedders will be 75 square metres to 95 square metres, and you're going to see more three-bedders. Because ultimately, if those baby boomers truly want to scale down and live in the city, they want to have a three-bedroom property, and you're going to see more demand for three-bedroom apartments in Melbourne and Sydney in the city rather than these one-bedroom shoeboxes that they keep building and selling to countries overseas. Anyway, that's my take on the current budget. I'm interested to think what you think. By the way, if you are interested in learning more, I also encourage you to attend my up-and-coming Real Estate Fast Track Weekend, which is a 2-day workshop educating investors on how to build, structure and automate a large property portfolio that eventually will have the potential of replacing your income. I run these from time to time. You can check out the link below for the latest dates. They're only in Melbourne, and even though they're free, they're very exclusive because there's only 40 seats available per event, mainly because we run them from this office here, and we've only got a seminar room that caters for 50 people. At these events, you're going to learn how to build, structure your property portfolio objectively, okay? So there's Stephen Moll. Now, who are the speakers? So Stephen Moll is the MC for the 2 days. He's been in real estate investing for over 20 years. We've got an accountant, Martina Angelique, who's a chartered accountant, and she's also a wealth specialist. She'll teach you the advantages of structuring your investment properties through trusts and corporate trustees rather than buying properties in your own name. We have Cameron Fisher from Changing Places Real Estate, who's also a registered valuer and a director of buymyplace.com, which just listed on the stock exchange recently. I'm talking about, of course, finance and psychology. And then we have Stephen McClutchy from Loans Australia. Stephen's a specialist lender, property portfolio strategist, who now has settled over $1 billion of lending for investors in Australia, which is unprecedented. So, you know, the five of us will be educating you over a period of 2 days, and I've structured this event in a very interesting way. Usually run them in the office here in St Kilda. However, we do run them at the Blackburn Hotel as well in St Kilda Road. Day one is all about finance, cash flow analysis, and due diligence. Day two, we put you onto a bus, and we take you around the best performing suburbs in Melbourne. And you can check out some of the suburbs on the website just by going to realestatefasttrack.com.au or clicking on the link below. Check out the dates. It's invaluable information, guys, and it's delivered by people that are completely unbiased. Also, if you want to get a copy of my book, Australian Property Finance Made Simple, go to amazon.com.au or bookonfinance.com.au or any good bookshop in Australia will have my book as well. The reason the first book that I've written is on finance is because I think finance and structuring your property portfolio correctly is the key, but it's also the most neglected part of education out there. Most people know where the best suburbs are to invest in, but they have very little information about finance and how to structure their finance correctly. So you can get a copy of that. Now, I've also mentioned at the beginning of this video that if you stay tuned to the very end, I'm going to give you a special bonus worth $497. And here it is right now, and there's no strings attached. This is a home study recording of that event from 2 years ago. Super user-friendly. It's point and click. You got 10 hours of video plus the manual, and you can get instant access to this right now. Simply click this link here, or if you scroll below, the link is just under the video. Instant access. It's free. There's nothing to buy. There's no upsell. There's no strings attached. It's just pure information as my gift to you guys for becoming loyal subscribers to my YouTube channel and for watching this video to the very end. That's it from my end, guys. Thank you very much. It's been great. And I'll see you on the inside. This is Konrad Bobilak. Catch you later.